Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bolland, and today I welcome Dr. Stephanie Cawthon, PhD. Stephanie is a disabled author, speaker, and researcher who has published 4 books. She is a professor, an academic leader, and mentor at the University of Texas at Austin. She is the founder and executive director of the National Disability Center for Student Success. To say I'm excited about today's episode is really an understatement. But first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the We're Not Stumped podcast.
I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the conversation. I'm looking forward to it too.
I very much am as well. We always start the podcast with a segment I call In Your Own Words. So I'd love the listeners to learn more about you.
It's interesting. I wear so many different hats, learning more depending on what hat you see me wearing in that day. And I would say even today, I think I have about 6 different hats on, depending on the hour. So, today's hat with you is somebody who has just published Disability is Human, and that is my first non-academic book. So I am now straddling a bit between my academic life and my more public life, and I appreciate the chance to be more public with you and with friends. That's wonderful. But I do come to this point in my life very much as a middle-aged person. I've hit that decade. We always worry is coming, with quite a few bumps in the road. And so I do think that I come to this conversation with sort of the formal training. Language development was my first love. With a congenital disability, significant hearing loss. I now identify as lowercase d deaf for the people in your audience who are aware of that terminology. I did not go to schools for the deaf. For the people in your audience who are aware of that significance, I was mainstreamed and only picked up sign language really in college and then in the workplace afterwards. So I've gone through different phases of what does disability mean? What does it look like? How does it shape what I do? But I would say, by the time I was by the time I was 20, everything pointed me in the direction of thinking about how do we consider disability as part of who we are and not as this completely separate thing that needs to be othered in order to be understood. And so how do we connect with that as people? And so, sometimes my people are my students. Sometimes my people are my colleagues. Sometimes my people are readers. Sometimes my people are folks on a podcast. So to me, that is the through line throughout. So whatever hat I might be wearing, whatever title I might have in my head, or hat on my head, the through line is always that sort of humanistic, connected, research based. I mean, I don't want to just be making up things and hurt people. That's not a goal. But I do think that the communication and empathy part and lived experience part combined with this sort of professional space, which for me is education, but it could be anything really. That was a happy accident. I came from a family of educators, and that sort of felt natural when I had to decide what to do. So that's a very sort of smorgasbordy answer to your question.
Well, thank you. I read something about you that we kind of have in common. You said I wasn't born in Canada, but I read that you said I was born in Canada in the early 70s before many protections for disabled people came into law. So what was that like for you at an early age?
Oh, for sure. My parents did not have context for having a child with a disability of any kind. There was no early screening for hearing loss at the time, and we do have that now. So it's not just protection, but it's also resources. There wasn't a sense of like, and here's what you do when that happens at the hospital. I was 4 before I got hearing aids. Like, that's remarkably late. I wasn't talking. I had no consonants. So this voice that you hear came very late in the game. And I think what is interesting when I work with young people now is that they grow up with a much higher sense of awareness. I get on all levels, of things that are shared and things that are protected. So for me, it meant that my early days were definitely, I was, the terminology has changed, but I was sent to a special school. away from the rest. And that has been overcoming that experience and was probably another 30 years in the making. Like always feeling like I was sent away from everybody else. So it had a huge psychological impact, I'll say. The speech training and everything happened as it needed to, but I do think that that pre-protection era, especially for those of us who have lived within that protected era as adults, it's a stark contrast and it's a daily contrast and it's still a daily fight. One of my favorite phrases is ADA is the floor, not the ceiling. Like it is minimum. It is necessary, it is critical, but it's also it doesn't change a culture all by itself. It's part of the culture that is then changing. So um I'm grateful to, it arrived after I left my formal training. ADA showed up. So I'm grateful that our young people have that context and experience.
Another thing I read was you had a sixth grade teacher that told you you'll never get past algebra. What is that like to not foster positive influences and positive thoughts for people in the disabled community?
The thing is, I don't think she really meant anything by it. Like she was not saying, "Oh, I'm gonna grind her gears and really make sure she knows who she is and who's." I don't think she was trying to put me in my place, but she was just unfiltered as a professional in middle school space, offering a judgment and felt the freedom. I won't say need, I will say freedom to just express that without any sense of this is a child who has aspirations. Maybe I should talk to their parents. Like there wasn't any sense of like standard of behavior of how you talk to young people with disabilities at the time. Maybe that's still true. But I think that when I think about her, I'm sure she's passed on by now. Oh, a funny little story related to that. So my brother read the book recently. My brother also has a much milder hearing loss and it has affected him in different ways, but also went to that same school. And he came to visit after the book let out and he said, I have disguised a number of the details. So it's not exactly that person in that place. And he said, is that so and so? And I was like, you betcha. He knew exactly who it was. And it was just one of those things where he was several years behind me, but that personality was consistent in that space, no matter who. So I didn't take it personally, really, like after I started writing about it. But I also, it was it was interesting to me to see my brother know exactly who that was and how that might have felt and how it was expressed, because people don't change all that much, and so I do think that there's sort of we carry who we are and what we think about with us naturally and wherever we go. And the question is, how do we learn to not check ourselves? That's not the thing I want to say, but how do we check in? How do we check in on things that we may not realize that we're doing, that we just go about our daily lives? Like this person was not intentionally setting out to convey this information that disability is not on her teacup. But clearly others knew, once you pointed out who this person was without naming them, knew exactly who that personality was. So how do we not change ourselves for the sake of change, but how do we check in and and think critically about some of those things? That's why I wrote this book, because I feel like we need opportunities to do that. And to do that, we need to feel like we're being encouraged to think hard thoughts. We are encouraged to do these things not just for us, but for those we care about. And there is a sense of, you know, it's not just it's not just like an admonishment or a slap on the wrist, but you really do have to be motivated by something. And what that is for each person, it's going to be different. So I don't know if I could talk to her today, beyond the grave, if I could be like, do you remember that? She wouldn't have remembered a moment of it, but no, the last thing at the end of this little wondering, I do think that, being aware of how much our words matter to other people. And that's part of my language thing, is always words and language matter not just to you, but to other people. They mean so much.
Very good point. I just want to remind everyone that we're on with Dr. Stephanie Cawthon. She is the author of Disability is Human, The Vital Power of Accessibility in everyday life. She can also be found at stephaniecawthon.com. You had talked a little bit about your own journey and maybe where it led you as far as some of your own education and where you were maybe put at some places. Was that the inspiration for founding the National Disability Center for Student Success. Was that a part of that?
think at the heart, for sure. I think, in my world here at the University of Texas, we very much want to make national impact. One of our phrases is what starts here changes the world. And I used to sort of say, okay, that's bold. I'm not changing the world. I may just, move the needle a little bit. But I really began in a number of iterations back to work at national level and also states both individually and collectively. And I think there's a great deal of opportunity to think about our systems around us. So we mostly spend our day in our local institution, our local community, our local city. We identify as I live in Austin, I identify with that. Um, and to think about what are those things that are beyond our daily knowledge, our daily looking, our daily interaction that have an impact on us. What are the policies that have an impact on us? We talk about ADA. What are the things that give opportunity? And again, I always focus on young people. What are the things that give opportunity to young people so that they do persist, so they don't stop at the first stumbling block? And to think about those things in a non-band-aid way. Okay, so not just the fix this problem with this student right now, though there are plenty of opportunities to do that. What is the proactive, preventative, sustainable approach? And I found great value over the last 15 to 20 years working in spaces where people were trying to do the things that were very difficult, which is systems level work. The things that are policies and practices, and it is a slow roll. You don't get a dopamine hit working on a 5-year project and hoping you get to the end and there's something concrete out of it. So the Disability Center itself, it's funny, I talked myself out of applying for the funding multiple times. I did not think, that's the imposter syndrome. I did not think that I had the chops to do this specific thing in this way. And it just became obvious to me that I had to try. And we had done smaller scale versions of the work that we do here at the center, here on campus and in other contexts. And this was the first time to sort of stand on it and say, this is how we're going to go about this research. We're going to bring disabled students into the center of the conversation. We're going to be fully outreach oriented. We're going to give practical tips along the way, not just at the end, at the appendix. Like, we're really going to flip the research world on its head and say, the problems and challenges of our people, meaning our students and faculty and administrators in higher ed, those drive the agenda. It's not just we're going to do this research and we'll see if it addresses your issues later. So it's been an opportunity to be very problem focused, been an opportunity to be very mentor focused. I'm amazed at the dynamics and the sort of nuances that come up on a daily basis, but you have to realize that most of the folks on this team have an access or accommodations thing that they're dealing with in the next hour. So it's very fresh, it's very real. So that's really what led to that, was kind of this sense of it is the harder work to do systems change, and it is something that I actually enjoy. So I need to be paying attention to it in that way.
Yes, thank you for that. I read another thing that you had said, the idea that accommodations and accessibility is coming at some cost to the abled is a false pretense. In other words, the way I took it is we're going to have to make an investment, and it's not always that. So can you expand on that thought a little bit?
I will tell you that thought gives me great emotion, and usually quite agitated ones, because I think the lens of cost and the lens of value are ones that are like that teacher. We make assumptions about how we talk about accommodations and accessibility in ways that, when we start with the cost conversation, immediately devalues the person or the people that you quote think you're doing this for. And that's transactional, which is a whole nother conversation we can have about, access and accommodations as transactional, as opposed to by design, which is intentional and in more about the people who are involved, as opposed to this one person who needs something. And for those of you who can't see me, I'm putting air quotes around that need, because that's really important, that we all have needs. And the idea that we've now singled out this one need and we're going to analyze its an impact on our bottom line is just to me, um, it's not that it's nonsensical. I understand why it happens, but also it misses the point that if you are not thinking about how this brings value, this access conversation brings value to the entire community that you're working with. And when you bring it, it's a responsibility of the individual to prove their worth, that they're worth that money or they're worth that service. Like that's a tough spot. And that's an uncomfortable conversation where the power dynamic is completely in one direction and usually not in the direction of the person who is saying, I'm here, I exist. Can we please make this possible to exist in a more functional way? And that to me is the heartbreak of many accessibility conversations when it does become a bit of a power dynamic, a bit of yeah, show me that you're worth that thing. And I've had many of those conversations personally and have witnessed them. And I think that was part of the reason why I have these conversations is because, it may be your default, but it is certainly it's doing damage when you do that. Yeah.
Understood. Again, I want to remind everyone we're on with Dr. Stephanie Cawthon, Disability is Human author. She can be found at stephaniecawthon.com. And really, to that thought, I read another quote from you that hit home for me. And it says, she's good in spite of her disabilities, the yes but effect, the praise that also cuts to the bone. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, you captured the imposter moment aspects of this experience multiple times. I wonder if that's the theme for today in a way, is how do you think through that? I think that, I'm a type A girl. I'm looking for approval. I think a lot of those of us who are young people with disabilities are looking for approval and looking for acceptance in ways that maybe are unique to that experience. And so evaluations of our performance academically or professionally or not so much in the home, but anything we do to sort of in the outside world have our credentials are important. Those things are fought for. There are many disabled people who don't have the chance to go to college or to get jobs and to live independently. Like those are not taken for granted. And so the applause and the sort of sense of this person is good, this person is qualified, this person is skilled. That is absolutely what we strive for. And we want to earn that. Like I know I want to earn that. I spend a lot of time making sure that I do my best to earn that, not just accolade, but just that the goodness of what I can offer is available. And when you put that disability disclaimer on it, you just destroy it. You take it all down and say, like, we can't look at you for your value. We have to look at you in spite of this. And the in spite of piece, it does set up a sense of not pity, but maybe it sends a sense of we assume this is going to not be possible. And when we do see somebody succeed, we we're caught off guard. Like, well, in spite of this thing that we assume would predict a negative outcome, oh my goodness, here's this thing that's positive. It takes away from it in a way. Like it shows more about the person saying it than it does about the person being evaluated. And honestly, when you want honest feedback, that's frustrating because you've just learned more about them than you have about your own work. That to me is hard. It's a hard one to swallow. But it's so nuanced. I don't know if most people would ever pick up on that, but that's the kind of thing that I've seen at least get under my skin a little bit.
Well, thank you for understanding the theme of the question. The theme I really had was around personal experience. Boy, Mike, you can tie your own shoes. Yeah, I've been doing it since I was 4, like anyone else. But it's the but part. But you have one hand. But who cares? That was the theme, and thank you for understanding the theme. I really appreciate that. How, when you look at some of your studies and all of your experiences, how can businesses be more welcoming of people with disabilities?
Oh, um, when I look at what It's the small little things that can be done. Like to me, it is both an opportunity, but it's also there are some. I have some sadness around it. Like it would take so little, and yet they're not there. But I think really the encouragement to businesses, and I very much honor and appreciate businesses that are being intentional about accessibility. I think that they are the leaders in this space, and there are many of them. I do think there is when you look at your workforce and you look at your employee base, if you really want to solve problems, if you really want tenacity, if you really want people who will figure out a way, disabled people are a good bet. They are a good bet. They're a strong bet. And I say that all the time. It's like you want somebody on your staff or your team who will put in not just the extra 10%, they've already had to put in 150% just to get to the door. That's the energy and commitment that you're going to get. So to me, it's an asset, and it is an experience that can benefit the entire organization. And I don't want to make broad generalizations, but I do think that there is a sense of when I see, especially young people, responding to high expectations and exceeding high expectations, like have high expectations, and they will be met and blown through in many cases when you don't expect it. And so that's the sort of research to business perspective is the quality of the people who come through these experiences is high. Not in a comparative way, not like better than others, but like it is not to be overlooked. There's an opportunity there.
Well, I certainly agree with that. As you look forward into your professional and personal life, what are you looking forward to the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's funny, we talked a little bit beforehand, and I think that you have achieved sort of some of those things that I have been looking forward to, really making explicit the implicit. So there are things about what I do and why I do it that, you might be able to read between the lines and say she's doing research or she's teaching or she's doing administration or she's publishing. I'm really looking forward to bringing some of those things together even more tightly. I think that having wearing fewer hats, but wearing them more clearly, I think will be something I'm looking forward to. So the things that I hope will shift. I also look forward to where this disability is human journey takes us, because it is really just the beginning of a journey. And some of it is the small things. Like I released an audiobook last week that I had to figure out how to do that myself. Just like you talk about, what's it like to launch a podcast? Well, I had to figure out how to launch an audiobook. Like that's a learning curve that I've really appreciated. We're doing a large print version. Okay, how do I learn about production of large print? So there's just so many things about accessibility that I have looked at through a research lens that I'm really looking forward through a communication and more of a sort of not PR, but kind of a outreach lens that I think will be exciting. And the answer to your question is really, I don't know. And I kind of like that. I don't know what's next. Yeah. Yeah.
Can people find that audiobook on your website?
Yes. The links are there. It's Audible and Apple iBooks, but you can also go to the website and that will have that information.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the We're Not Stumped podcast. I learned a lot today, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being on this podcast.
No, I really appreciate being here. And I also want to say thank you to Audrey for her interpreting. For those of you who are listening, you might have noticed a few pauses. That's because sight and sound operate on different speeds. So we're always grateful to have Audrey present. So thank you, Audrey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the We're Not Stumped podcast. I have an ask for everyone that got to this point of the podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe. The reason is simple. These stories need to be shared. It will help it to get out there to the people that really need to hear these stories.